Welcome to the Boring Channel, where sleep begins. Subscribe for more boring documentaries created to help you relax, rest, and fall asleep. In the stillness of a medieval morning, that deep, profound stillness that only an ancient, undeveloped landscape could truly possess, when breath lingered in the air like faint, fleeting clouds of smoke, each exhalation a visible testament to the biting chill, and the sun a pale, reluctant disk in the vast, often overcast sky, barely warmed the frost-covered thatch, the rough, natural roofing that crowned every humble dwelling. Villagers stirred slowly, with the languid, unhurried movements of those whose lives were governed by the slow turning of the seasons, stirred slowly under woolen blankets, heavy, scratchy, but oh so vital. Their homes, crafted from rough-hewn timber and packed earth, often no warmer than the frost-bitten ground outside, the very earth itself seemingly frozen solid beneath the flimsy floorboards. Inside stone cottages, or those modest dwellings constructed from a mix of wattle and daub, held together by branches and mud, topped with that familiar thatch, the hearth was truly the heart, the epicenter of what little warmth and light existed. Embers, carefully preserved from the previous night, a precious, smoldering inheritance, nestled under a protective layer of ash, a fine, gray powder, patiently waiting for the morning's first breath of air, a gentle puff from a leather bellows, or simply the natural draft of the room, a spark, tiny, fleeting, almost imperceptible, a flicker, hesitant at first, then growing with a slow, deliberate grace, to begin the timeless ritual of warmth, a daily recommencement of life itself. Children, small and vulnerable, huddled instinctively beneath layered tunics, rough-spun linen and coarse wool, often hand-me-downs, patched and repatched, clutching their wooden bowls of thin porridge, a simple gruel made from oats or barley, perhaps with a handful of dried berries if they were fortunate, or just water, their fingers, always, perpetually, red from the cold, tips often chapped and aching, faces flushed by the smoke that curled lazily through the room, for chimneys were not always present, and the smoke often lingered, acrid and persistent, before finding its way out through a smoke hole in the roof, or simply seeping through the gaps in the walls. The windows, if indeed these humble abodes possessed any true apertures at all, were little more than narrow slits cut into the thick walls. Or perhaps, in slightly more prosperous homes, small openings covered with oiled parchment stretched thin over a wooden frame, allowing in only a dull, diffused gray light, a muted illumination that did little to dispel the gloom, and, crucially, letting out precious, precious heat. For every crack, every gap was a silent thief of comfort. Winters in the Middle Ages were not gentle. They were not the picturesque, romanticized scenes sometimes depicted. No, they were harsh, unrelenting, brutal. They arrived often suddenly, without much warning, with fierce winds howling across moorland and hill, a mournful, desolate sound that could chill one to the very bone, snow piling high against cottage doors, drifts that could trap families indoors for days, paths vanishing completely beneath an unbroken, seamless blanket of white, making travel perilous, if not impossible, and the sound of wolves, sometimes a distant, eerie chorus in the distance, a reminder of the wild, untamed world that lay just beyond the village's fragile perimeter. Villagers prepared all year, with a diligence born of absolute necessity, for these long, arduous months of stillness and scarcity, a period when the land itself seemed to hold its breath. Harvests were painstakingly gathered in late summer, every grain, every root, every fruit, painstakingly collected and counted, stored in dark, cool cellars dug deep into the earth, in lofts, high in the rafters, where air circulated, and in woven baskets, tightly sealed and hung from those same rafters. Apples, carefully wrapped in straw to prevent bruising and spoilage. Onions, with their papery skins, braided together into long ropes and looped around beams, drying slowly. Meat, slaughtered in the autumn, preserved with generous amounts of salt and smoke, hung from dark corners above the fire, a constant, smoky presence. In wealthier homes, the manor houses or the abodes of prosperous merchants, there might be barrels of ale, brewed from their own grains, offering a small comfort, or jars of honey, sweet and precious, gathered from their own beehives. But for most, the vast majority of the population, it was a monotonous diet of root vegetables, dug from the frozen ground when possible, or stored in sand pits. Hard, unyielding bread, baked from coarse, often stale flour, and dried peas, rehydrated and boiled, all of it carefully, meticulously rationed, measured by hand, often counted out, day by day, each portion a silent acknowledgement of the finite supply. Outside, the endless cycle of life continued, even in the harshest conditions. Animals needed care, a constant, demanding chore, even in the fiercest, most blinding storms. Goats and sheep, vital sources of milk, wool, and meat, were herded into communal wooden enclosures, simple, rough shelters, straw scattered deep on the floor, several feet thick, to keep them from the frozen, unforgiving earth. The warmth of their own bodies, clustered together, their only real defense against the biting cold. Men trudged through snow that often reached their knees, sometimes their waists, to chop firewood, a never-ending task, their axes dull from repeated use, nicks and chips in the metal, swinging again and again into frozen trunks, the ringing sound echoing unnaturally in the quiet, frigid air. Hands blistered, raw, sometimes bleeding from the cold and friction. Shoulders sore, aching with the repetitive strain. But each heavy log meant another day of heat, another evening of survival, a direct link between effort and existence. In forests, vast and often dangerous, stretching for miles beyond the village, hunters moved quietly, with a stealth born of centuries of practice, bows drawn, taut, ready, listening intently for the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of a rabbit through the underbrush, a tiny sound that could mean the difference between hunger and a meal, or the distant clatter of hooves in the snow, the heavier tread of a deer or a wild boar. Tracks were followed, sometimes for hours, through dense, tangled trees, their branches laden with snow, beneath hanging icicles, glittering like frozen daggers in the dim light, until prey was eventually found, or, just as often, lost, melting away, vanishing into the deeper, more impenetrable woods, a test of patience, endurance, and often sheer luck. Some men, less skilled with the bow, or perhaps simply desperate, set traps. Simple snares of rope and bent wood, camouflaged with leaves and snow, hoping, always hoping, the bait, a piece of stale bread, a few dried berries, would be enough to catch something, anything, a small bird, a nimble squirrel, a stoat, to stretch the meager stew pot another day, to add a whisper of protein to an otherwise bland diet. In the evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon with a startling swiftness, the village grew quiet, a deep, pervasive hush that settled over everything. The only sounds the creak of timber in the cold, the faint crackle of distant fires. Candles, precious and short-lived, flickered low, their tiny flames struggling against the vast darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough stone walls, transforming familiar objects into distorted, ghostly shapes. The fire, now the sole source of significant warmth, was stoked once more, a nightly ritual. Embers stirred with iron rods, sometimes a long, sturdy stick, wood added slowly, one log at a time, each placement deliberate, as children, sleepy and compliant, pressed their backs instinctively to the radiating warmth, their tiny bodies absorbing every precious calorie of heat, and mothers, ever industrious, spun thread by the hypnotic glow of flame and the enveloping silence, the quiet whir of the spinning wheel, the only interruption. Wool, sheared from the sheep during the warmer months, now carded by hand into soft, fluffy clouds, spindles turned by tired, work-worn hands, transforming the raw fibers into thin, continuous strands, and the faint, rhythmic sound of a loom echoed from the corner of some homes, a soft thud and clack, as cloth was slowly, patiently, meticulously woven, inch by painstaking inch, the warp and weft intertwining to create the very fabric of their lives. Blankets, thin and worn from years of use, were patched, new scraps of fabric stitched onto old, creating a patchwork of past winters. Cloaks, their primary defense against the elements, sewn tighter, seams reinforced. Mittens, often made from worn, repurposed cloth, remnants of old tunics or blankets, crafted and recrafted, again and again, until they disintegrated completely. The cold was always present, an unseen, pervasive force, in the breath that clouded the air, even indoors, a visible cloud that vanished almost instantly, in the frost that crept relentlessly across the inside of wooden shutters, forming delicate, crystalline patterns, in the thin, fragile ice that formed in the water jugs before dawn, a silent signal of the night's enduring chill. But so was resilience, a quiet, unyielding strength that permeated every aspect of their existence, a strength not often spoken of, but constantly demonstrated. Families gathered tightly at night, huddled together on straw pallets beneath layers of fur and wool, sharing stories passed down through generations, tales of ancestors, of mythical beasts, of brave knights. Songs, simple and often melancholic, hummed softly, and prayers, whispered under fur coverings, appeals for warmth, for sustenance, for survival. A lullaby, hummed low, a gentle, repetitive tune, a tale of warmth to come, of the spring and summer that seemed impossibly far away, and the soft, comforting rhythm of a mother's voice, a soothing drone, guiding children into the deep, necessary solace of dreams. Above them, the rough-hewn roofs creaked under the immense weight of accumulated snow, timbers groaning under the strain, and winds moaned mournfully through chimneys, or simply through the gaps in the walls, a desolate symphony, yet inside, amidst the sparse furnishings and the dim light, there was a stillness, a profound sense of calm that transcended the physical discomfort, a quiet strength found only in the shared bond of survival. The church played its undeniable role, too, a central pillar of medieval life, offering spiritual solace, but also practical guidance and a sense of community during the arduous winter months. In winter, chapels, often the largest stone structures in a village, remained open, their heavy wooden doors a stark contrast to the swirling snow outside. Stone floors swept clean, though still perpetually cold. Candles, dozens of them, sometimes hundreds, if the church was wealthy, lit along the altar, flickering against saints carved in wood, their faces serene and impassive, the only source of significant illumination beyond the pale light of morning. People gathered, bundled and wrapped in every layer they owned, the rich scent of unwashed wool and damp earth filling the air, to hear sermons about endurance, about the virtues of patience and sacrifice, lessons drawn from Scripture and the lives of saints, about St. Nicholas, whose feast day brought a brief respite of celebration, about warmth of the soul, a spiritual comfort that transcended the physical cold, and the absolute necessity of patience in hardship, for winter would eventually yield to spring. Sometimes, after the long, often dreary services, bowls of thin broth were passed, among the poorest, those most vulnerable to the winter's grip, perhaps a little vegetable soup or a gruel thickened with barley, bread, often black and hard, broken and shared among hands clasped in silent gratitude, a profound, unspoken acknowledgement of shared suffering and communal support. The monastery, often the most stable, most organized, and surprisingly, the warmest place in winter, was a true refuge, a bastion of relative comfort and learning. Monks, clad in their thick wool habits, moved silently through covered corridors, their breath pluming in the frigid air, chanting their daily offices, praying for the souls of the living and the dead, tending to the sick in their infirmaries, offering what limited remedies they possessed, stirring great pots of stew with wooden spoons as large as a man's arm, feeding not only their brethren, but often a stream of desperate villagers and travelers. They grew herbs indoors, in sheltered courtyards, or even heated monastic buildings, small pockets of green defiance against the winter's monochrome, cared for chickens and goats within the monastery walls, their animal warmth contributing to the overall temperature, and welcomed travelers, pilgrims, and the destitute who sought shelter from the relentless snow and biting wind, offering a simple meal and a place by the fire. In noble manors and the great sprawling castles, the scene was, of course, different, but not entirely without its own struggles and discomforts. Luxury in the Middle Ages was relative, especially in winter. Servants, a small army of them, rushed constantly to seal windows with wool or heavy tapestries, trying to block the persistent drafts, to layer fresh rushes, often scented with herbs, deep on the floor, providing a little insulation and absorbing some of the dampness, to block the drafts that whistled eerily beneath heavy wooden doors, carved with elaborate designs, but still ill-fitting. Meat, joints of venison or boar, roasted slowly over great, roaring fires in vast hearths that could comfortably fit a small family, the succulent smell a stark contrast to the sparse meals of the villagers. Wine, often mulled with expensive, imported spices like cinnamon and cloves, offering a warming, intoxicating comfort. Furs, thick and luxurious, lined every bench and bed, offering softness and insulation. But even with these comforts, the cold was a constant, pervasive presence. But outside, even the colossal, imposing castle walls, built to withstand sieges, could not silence winter's voice, the mournful lament of the wind, the relentless assault of the snow. Frost grew thick on the towering battlements and stone walls, turning them into glistening, treacherous surfaces. Footsteps, if anyone dared venture out, froze almost instantly to the cold, unforgiving stone of the courtyards, and the rich scent of wood smoke, thick and pungent, curled lazily into the cold, stark blue sky, a visual plume announcing the presence of warmth. Winter balls, grand feasts, these were rare, cloaked in a certain solemnity, not the boisterous, joyous affairs of summer, the very atmosphere subdued, perhaps a reflection of the season's inherent challenges. Even among the elite, news of famine, of plague, of hardship in the surrounding lands, traveled fast, carried by messengers on horseback, or whispered by merchants, a constant, chilling reminder of the fragility of life. And so, songs, even in the great halls, were quieter, more contemplative. Meals, though plentiful, were more subdued, conversations more hushed, and prayers, offered by lords and ladies alike, were deeper, more earnest, a desperate plea for the long-awaited spring. In villages, far from the grand castles, where specialized doctors were unheard of, healing was passed through generations, through herbs and the gentle, knowing touch of experienced hands. Willow bark, gathered from the riverbanks and dried, steeped in hot water, an ancient analgesic, garlic, pungent and potent, crushed and mixed with honey, a natural antibiotic, infusions of mint and sage, carefully brewed to ease persistent coughs and feverish brows. Simple, natural remedies, often surprisingly effective. The healer, often an elderly woman, a widow, whose wisdom came from years of observation and tradition, moved quietly from home to home, with her worn pouch of roots and dried leaves, each one imbued with generations of knowledge. Her whispered remedies, passed down from mother to daughter, from grandmother to grandchild, a sacred trust. And though little was certain in such uncertain times, her presence, her calm demeanor, her steady hands, brought a profound sense of calm and a glimmer of hope to the afflicted. Midwives, too, courageous women, worked tirelessly even in the deepest frost, their skills vital for the continuation of life. Wrapped in layers of wool, often stained and smelling of smoke, kneeling patiently by straw beds, softened with old blankets, welcoming new life into a world shrouded in ice and darkness, assisting in the difficult, often dangerous miracle of childbirth. A baby's first cry, piercing the heavy silence, a mother's sigh of exhaustion, of relief, a candle burning low beside the bed, its small flame casting flickering shadows on the new, fragile face, and hope, resilient and persistent, flickering quietly in the shadows, a tiny spark in the vast, cold world. Every day, in the unyielding rhythm of medieval winter, was a ritual, a series of repeated, essential tasks. Chop wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe, mend boots, stitching worn leather with thick thread, stir stew, slowly, patiently, over the fire, check traps, with a mix of anticipation and dread, repair roof, patching holes with straw and mud, sweep hearth, clearing the ash for the next day's fire. The repetition became rhythm, a steady, unwavering pulse of life. The rhythm became survival, a testament to human endurance, a quiet, powerful dance with the elements. And when spring finally crept back, slowly, hesitantly, one drip at a time from melting snow, tiny rivulets forming in the mud, one tentative bird song, barely audible at the edge of the trees, a hopeful, fragile melody. The people, those who had endured, stepped into the thaw, blinking in the brighter light. Not triumphant in any grand, theatrical sense, not unchanged, for the winter left its marks, physical and emotional, but still standing, leaning forward into the promise of warmer days. Still breathing, each breath a quiet victory. Still alive, a profound, simple truth. The Middle Ages were not gentle. They demanded a profound strength from those who lived through them. But within their formidable winters, within the pervasive cold and scarcity, there was a quiet, almost meditative strength, a resilience woven into the very fabric of daily life, a kind of bravery not marked by shining swords or glorious battles on open fields, but by patience, the steady, unyielding patience of waiting for the seasons to turn, by routine, the comforting, predictable cycle of daily chores, and the simple, enduring determination to endure, to simply keep going, one breath, one day, one meager meal at a time. So now, as the fire in your own hearth, or perhaps the glow of a bedside lamp, crackles low, and the wind, if any, rustles softly outside your window, let your mind drift, slowly, peacefully, to those frost-covered windows of long ago, to the soft, rhythmic clack of a spinning wheel, to a mother whispering a timeless lullaby, her voice a gentle balm, and a sleeping child, safe and warm, curled beneath hand-stitched quilts, dreaming of a spring they knew would eventually arrive. This has been The Boring Channel, a gentle companion for sleepless nights. If you found comfort in this tale, if its quiet rhythms soothed your mind, consider subscribing and liking this video. And rest well. Good night.